This conference will now be recorded.
Good evening, and I'd like to call to order the City of Haslet's Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. The date is Tuesday, June 29th, 2021, and the time is 6:32 p.m. And we do have a quorum present. We have a couple items of community interest to share before we get started on our regular agenda items. The Haslet City offices and the public library are going to be closed on Monday, July 5th in observance of Independence Day. And our second item of community interest is our Mayor, Mr. Halsey, is with us this evening, and he wanted to do a greet with the Planning and Zoning Commission. So, Mr. Halsey, thank you for being here.
Chairman, commission members, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to get to meet you. I would reveal our. So, nonetheless, thank you. I got you. I'm one. I hit one right. Couple of items, and let me just take a moment and suggest reading. But I know that we are putting together training, and I got this for you because this is where all the training. The blue tab is regulation plan. An interesting part I want to point out on page 487, section 20 or 211.045, the comprehensive plan. And just take note, zoning regulations must be adopted in accordance with the comprehensive plan. It must be designed to lessen congestion, secure, safe, fire, panic, promote health and general welfare, provide adequate, prevent the avoid undue consequences, or facilitate sewers, parks, other requirements. You know, I look at that, I credit with force the out or give us the bill and really do that. The next, the green tab is municipal regulation of subdivisions, property development. That's all pretty interesting, and especially when you read it in the process and what it is can't do. Yellow tab, orange tab. More at the page 513, subchapter C, helper participation and content help kids. And that gives you a good insight. Last section of your is page 520, chapter 213. This not a long section, but I do want to draw your attention to page 520. And it's section 213.05. Notation on a map. Look at these words. A map of a comprehensive plan illustrating future land shall contain the following clearly visible statements. Comprehensive plans should not constitute zoning or establish zoning. And that's important. I know there's been brought up I guess a couple of months ago, last approved that up on Blue Mountain Road, and I heard a couple of folks going, don't understand, because our comprehensive plan expressly says this is a mixed use development. That's what we intend to do. How what's that? What's that? Look at the next post. It's your zoning. Clearly, what you see is north Haslet Park. Other calling it's zone. It's the zoning. This is nice and someone comes in. Well, it does build zoning. Like that. That's what. So we'll be making effort looking into this aspect, trying to line up our but somehow got this. So hopefully that answers the question. How it's just what's the parent. One last thing, or a couple of things. Chapter 22, I didn't hear Mark. We are a type-rated local. Chapter 22. Starting. And really, that's the conclusion. That's right. I won't be playing zoning. I telling you, yeah. Read the book. That's all. But I'll remember. Come over and get blessed. Anyway, I appreciate all of it. always look at kids. Question.
Yes, I actually do have a question, and it came out of some of our discussion at our last meeting. We all understand we're appointed by the city council, and we appreciate the opportunity to serve, and we're all thankful that we have the opportunity to be here this evening. One of the things we want to make sure we're doing is listening to city council, understanding the vision that city council has for the city of Haslet. A lot of new representation in the city council now, and including yourself. And maybe at some point, if it's appropriate, maybe a joint workshop to talk about the vision that this current city council has, so that we understand that when we consider things that come before us. And I think that would be very helpful for our work that we do.
That's actually first thing got it's vision. Yeah. But we're coming much in the vision that we will express the vision. Everybody who- So it'll be there.
Great. Thank you very much.
So much.
All right, moving on. Agenda item 3A, hold a public hearing, discuss, consider, and act on a recommendation for a final plat of lot 1R, 2R, and 3R, Block 1 of Schoolhouse 156 corner, being a replat of lots 1 and 2, Block 1 of Schoolhouse Road, 156 corner, being 2.9 acres located at the intersection of FM 156 and Schoolhouse Road in the city of Haslet. And we'll begin with our staff presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commission members. This is a replat to add 1.46 acres to the existing subdivision, that being the lot 3R, proposed lot 3R. The original subdivision was platted in 2016 with only 2 lots. That was the original lots 1 and 2. And the property is requesting to add create the lot 3R to add the 1.46 acres. Access is being provided by a access easement from Schoolhouse Road, and water and sanitary sewer is provided by Schoolhouse Road, existing lines along Schoolhouse Road. Development Review Committee finds the plat meets all the requirements of the Texas Local Government Code and the City Subdivision Ordinance, and I can answer any questions that you might have.
Is the applicant present this evening? Is there anything you would like to add in addition to what the city staff presented? And if make sure the microphone's on, if you would, please.
Hello. My name is Wayne Lee. I'm from Haslet Center. The track that we're trying to get planted primarily because we now know the viaduct coming. If we don't do this, I'm afraid all that land will be landlocked. Be a detriment to the city. We don't anticipate building soon. One meets all the criteria. 3 facts. I have any questions?
Thank you, sir. At this time, we'll open the public hearing. Is there anyone wishing to speak for or against agenda item 3A? I'm sorry. Yes, 3A. Okay, recognizing no one came forward, we'll close the public hearing and we'll open it up for discussion. Are there any questions for the city staff or the applicant? I do have a question for the city staff. Would there be a site plan that would be developed or created at some point in the future? Would this fall under the existing subdivision ordinance for that property?
No, well, yes, in order to get a building permit on the site, he would have to submit a site plan under the current rules and regulations. The site plan would be vested under whatever rules that were applied. So let's say if, for instance, I know we're talking about a lighting ordinance and we're looking at adopting something in the future. If the site plan comes in after that lighting ordinance is adopted, then he must comply with that lighting ordinance. So anything adopted before the site plan application comes in, they must apply for or comply with, I'm sorry. Mr. Chairman, if I could real quick, I just want to point out for the record that Commissioner Hilborn had to step down due to conflict of interest. However, there's still a quorum, so you're free to still vote as you are, but I just want to point that out for the record.
Thank you. If there's no other questions, is there a motion?
I'd like to make the motion that we recommend the city council the approval of agenda item 3A.
Okay,
I'll
there's a
second it.
motion been made, it's been seconded. All in favor, raise your hand. All opposed? All abstain? And the motion passes, and we got one abstention. Okay, the motion passes. Moving on, agenda item 3B. This is a presentation by the city staff. We're going to have a discussion regarding the process of development-related application. Turn it over to our city staff for that presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commission members. First off, let me address one thing. As the mayor alluded to in his comments, I did submit my letter of resignation to the city, and that is effective on July 9th. So that being, oh, okay, thank you. It's not that pretty to look at, it's okay. Back to the screen is probably better. But no, so that's going to be effective on July 9th. That being the case, I've talked to the chairman about this presentation tonight, and we both think it's probably a good idea to still have this conversation, keeping in mind that the next professional y'all get into this position may have a little bit different take on different things, as we all do. But what we're going to talk about tonight really goes hand in hand with the mayor already talked about a little bit on some of the things that are a basis for what we do, but also just gives you an idea of what staff looks at, some of the constraints that staff has. I don't have any real formal presentation. I've got some notes here. And really my idea is just to spur some conversation amongst the commission. And I'll do my best to answer any questions that you have. Okay. So really starting out at our last meeting, we talked about what we kind of envisioned for this agenda item. Yes, we're working on organizing some formal training for the commission. I think the conversation, at least at the staff level, has been talks of including the city council in that training as well, just because we think there's a benefit in that. And so one of the first things that I wanted to talk about was really what our tools are, what instruments we have as staff, and when we're looking at applications. And really, I'm going to focus on three big ones for tonight's conversation. One is going to be the local government code, which obviously the mayor just went over with you pretty well, outlined what provisions from a planning standpoint we look at. One thing I would like to add, well, let me step back and let me go into the different sections that the local government code discusses with us, our staff about. So you've got chapters 213, which I believe was highlighted in the mayor's section. And that talks about comprehensive planning. An important thing to note, though, in comprehensive planning, and I know that some of us already had this conversation, comprehensive plans are not required in the state of Texas. It says that it encourages, and it says that cities shall do or may do certain things. Let me get my wording correctly. May do certain things. And if they're going to do a comprehensive plan, then there are certain things that they need to focus on, such as traffic congestion, public facilities, and things like that. Part of the comprehensive plan should also be a future land use plan. They don't necessarily call out a future land use plan in the local government code, but that's essentially what it's interpreted as. And then it also says that if you do have a comprehensive plan, that your regulations, your zoning ordinance should be based on those comprehensive plan goals and policies. Okay. Next tool that we use is our zoning ordinance. In the city of Haslet, we have a conference plan, so our zoning ordinance was based on the goals and objectives of the comprehensive plan. Okay, so and what the zoning ordinance and map do is they're supposed to mimic that. Now there are cases, and again, already pointed out tonight, that there are cases where maybe our goals and objectives did not carry over from the comprehensive plan did not carry over to our zoning map. I want to first say Haslet that's not an anomaly in Haslet. That is, I would say, in my 20+ year career, that's fairly common in cities, that the zoning map doesn't always translate. The land use map is what we want to see. And a lot of times cities rely on the developer that's development driven or private property owner driven. So some cities, I will say, I've experienced 2 cities in my career that they've done it a different way. As soon as they adopted a future land use map, they went through and rezoned the entire city to match that. It could be done either way. And I will say one way or the other, it's not the right or wrong way. It's whatever the community wants. Okay. And as I'm talking and y'all have questions or you have comments, interrupt me. I really want this to be a discussion tonight. Okay. So zoning ordinance, zoning map, those are the regulations that are adopted in accordance with the comprehensive plan. Also, just for a little bit of background, zoning ordinance sets kind of it sets a couple of different things, but it's the regulation. It sets the bulk regulations. You've probably heard me refer to bulk regulations in the past. Bulk regulations are those of setbacks, heights. It's kind of the common core of the different zoning districts. Some of you that have been on P&Z for a while, you know all this already. It also establishes, zoning ordinance also establishes site design requirements, such as landscaping requirements, building articulation requirements, lighting ordinance requirements, anything like that, how we want the site to develop, it establishes that as well. So, and how we want it to look when it's completely developed. And then the last of the big 3 that I was going to go over tonight is the subdivision regulations. Let me step back, and I know this is already provided for you in your local government code, but concert plan is in chapter 213 of local government code. Zoning ordinance and map is in chapter 211 of the local government code. And then now subdivision regulations is in chapter 212. And that's really where I want to talk a little bit about processing tonight, because right now that's what we're seeing a lot of, or platting. And so I want to talk a little bit about what our requirements are and how we focus and how we process those applications. But essentially, subdivision regulations are the subdivision of land, the platting aspect that we see, and also focusing and make sure we have infrastructure improvements that are needed to serve those lots that we create through the platting process. Also, and because this is becoming a hot topic these days, in the chapter 212, the subdivision regulations also give us the authority to regulate some development and some development activity in our ETJ, our exteritorial jurisdiction area. So let me first, let's talk about how we process these development applications. Almost always, when someone comes in with any type of application they want to do, I have in the provisions in the ordinance and everything we have written in our local ordinances, we highly encourage a pre-application conversation. And what that pre-application conversation is that's the first time a developer or a landowner, whoever wants to make application, they come in and they meet with our development review committee. That's why you'll see on all of our recommendations, the development review committee recommends this or finds this. That is a committee of staff. It's going to be myself, Mr. Chambers, Mr. Harvey from the fire department, also the fire chief, our city engineer, public works director, even our librarian. Am I missing somebody? Our building official. Anybody pipe in and tell me if I missed somebody. But it's the core group of staff that's going to review and look at these applications. And primarily in that pre-development meeting, we're getting information from the developer as to what they want to accomplish, and we're giving them information that they may need. You know, location of water lines, flow of different lines that may be out there. If there's a zoning challenge they may have to overcome. If there's a site design requirement that they may be talking to us about, they're going to have to ask a variance because of some sort of feature on the land. They can't comply with our regulation. We talk about all that in that meeting. And that gives us a chance to really work out some of the details and for us to provide the applicant with what I call good customer service. And that's just giving them upfront of what their expectations should be throughout the entire process. So that's the very first thing we do. I would say 99% of the applications you see go through that pre-development application process. There may be some things that don't go through the full application process, pre-development application process, just because they're pretty clear cut and they really don't need that level of expertise looking at them. So now let's get into when an application is submitted. So what our local ordinance says is that when an application is submitted, I have 10 days to review that application, all the documents that are submitted with it, and I have to get a letter out to the applicant within those 10 days to certify whether the application is complete or not. So what that means is if an application is complete, that means, let's say if it's a site plan application, then it's going to have everything we need to review that site plan. It's going to have a detailed site plan. It's going to have landscaping plans. It's going to have, when we adopt a lighting ordinance, it's going to have a photometric plan. Anything, a building elevation, anything that we look at during the site plan process or any application, we're going to look at that and I'm going to look at that within those first 10 days and make sure that it meets all that. And then once I've done that is when I send it out to the entire staff for them to review their certain sections, whether it be fire department's going to review and make sure the fire hydrants are located in the right place. Engineer's going to review and make sure that what's being built as far from a infrastructure standpoint meets our standards. So that's what we're doing in those first 10 days is I'm making sure that the application is complete and it can be reviewed.
So Wes, does this include zoning changes, or does it have to comply with however that property is already zoned?
Well, okay, so for instance, if a zoning change comes in, then yes, I've got 10 days to make sure they have given me everything I need from a staff standpoint to review it and make a good recommendation to you as a body and then ultimately to city council as to what we need to make that recommendation on the zoning. Now, obviously there's a checklist, all of these checklists that we go through on our website. And when I envisioned any type of training that we do, we would go over those checklists with y'all in detail so you could understand. But for instance, on a zoning change, if somebody comes in for a zoning change, I'm not looking at it to see in that 10-day review period, I'm not looking at it to see if it meets the conference plan, future land use map. I'm not doing that type of analysis in that 10-day period. What I'm doing is making sure that I've got a full survey on the site. I've got all the property owner signatures that need to be on the application. For a zoning change, it's fairly quick review. It's that detailed analysis after that 10 days that I've said your application is complete. Now I'm going to review it. And there are some times that I get zoning change applications that there's no way in the world anybody would ever recommend that they approve it. And I'll go back to the applicant and say, you're making a horrible, you're wasting your money, $1,000, whatever it is, to make this application because it's never going to get approved. It doesn't come anywhere near meeting what the city wants as they've said on the comprehensive plan, or it's just from my experience of listening to y'all as a body and to city council as a body and talking to other staff that have been here, know that that's just not what this community wants to see. That's part of having that staff on board because they see all the applications that come forward and they learn. We learn your mannerisms as to what you're interested in, what you're not interested in. We learn that from council. That again provides the applicant and provides you some comfort level that you're not getting just for, I'm just going to speak bluntly, ridiculous applications on something that you know would never happen. You know, I give you an example. I had a couple of weeks ago someone call in and on Blue Mountain Road inside the city where we have land use control, they wanted to do a trucking facility. Knew there was no way in the world that was going to happen. That was not going to fly for zoning, for planning zoning. It didn't comply with our future land use. And even if it did, or even if it was a borderline kind of questionable area, I know from listening to conversations that y'all have had, from conversations that council's had, we don't want to, plus we have an ordinance of no trucks on Blue Mountain Road. We don't want trucks on Blue Mountain Road. Now, There are some areas, and that goes back to our ETJ. Now I've used that example, I want to make sure everybody understands. Part of Blue Mound Road is located in our ETJ, so I don't have land use control over ETJ. I just have subdivision control. So there are some areas that you will have some inconsistencies with that, but just know that's what staff is looking at throughout that process.
So case in point here, when the developer of Sweetgrass came in, he proposed the plan development, PD. So that land was already zoned as AG, as agricultural. So is it at this point in the process where the decision is made to present it to P&Z as a plan development as opposed to keeping it AG?
Well, it's not the staff's decision to make that. And I'm going to, that's a great example because I wasn't here for when that application originally came in. So let me tell you how that's typically handled. Someone comes in with a plan development that doesn't meet existing zoning. If they're coming in with any zoning request, it's not going to meet existing zoning. It was medium density residential on the future land use. And there is, and I know there's been a lot of discussion, especially since Sweetgrass, about the interpretation of medium density residential description. And I don't want to get into that tonight because that's not really the purpose of tonight. But as a staff person looking at that, my initial thinking is, okay, if it meets medium density residential, it will, even if it, let's take out let me step back. Let me take out the definition that's in the future land use map. It said residential, okay? And let's say that they wanted to come in as a PD and they wanted to do all 5,000 square foot lots. When you're looking at that, because, and I know we've somewhat had this conversation in the past, future land use is kind of a bubble plan, and it's just kind of this is what we'd like to see. Developers see that and say, okay, well, right or wrong, and sometimes it's both ways, actually. Sometimes developers come in and say, you know what, they say they don't want that, but I'm going to propose it anyway. From a staff standpoint, I can only tell them, so I can't deny them to make application. I can only say, I don't think it's a good idea, or I don't think you're going to have good chances, but they can still say, we're going to do it. And I still process it because that's their legal right to do, and that's my job to do. That's when it gets to y'all to make a recommendation as to whether you believe, based on the analysis that staff gives you, that you think it's the right thing or not the right thing. That's where you look at the tools that staff has given you, and we usually lay those out in your staff reports. If you'll recall, and Sweetgrass is an interesting one because I came in the middle of that project, so it was already under staff review, and I think I got here in October, and I think by December, if I'm not mistaken, it was in front of y'all. So I was writing a staff report and just outlining all those. I was outlining provisions in the comprehensive plan, outlining provisions in our zoning ordinance that talked about how you can, what you should be looking at. But ultimately, it is your call from a Planning and Zoning Commission recommendation as to whether you think it's a good development for the city or not. Does it address some of those traffic concerns? Does it address some of the other concerns that are typically looked at during a zoning change? That's what you're looking at during that. Did I answer your question, Ms. Marcus?
Well, so at that point, we would have had the authority to turn that project down because it's actually zoned as agricultural. They wanted to rezone it as planned development. So that gives us the authority or the right to turn that project down just because we don't like the project or for whatever reason it doesn't meet the comprehensive plan?
Zoning is discretionary in the state of Texas, so yes, sir, you're right. The planning, and you have the right, I'm going to change your words a little bit just so we're talking apples to apples here. You have, as a board, you have the right to recommend denial. And you could have done that at that point in time if you so choose.
Without legal liability.
I do want to make sure we're very clear. I am not your legal representative. So I'm not going to keep you out of court. But what I would say is, yes, it's been my experience that if Planning and Zoning Commission makes a recommendation on a zoning change, which is discretionary, because you feel like it doesn't meet the comprehensive plan or any of those things laid out in a staff report, traffic, infrastructure needs, public facilities, anything like that, you have the ability to recommend denial to that. Yes.
And when that did come up for a vote, not all of us were in favor of that motion either.
So does that help? Okay. So, okay, so we've gotten through what I call the completeness stage of an application. And we are now, either I have sent a letter to the applicant saying, one, it's complete, or two, it's incomplete, and here's why it's incomplete. And getting into the weeds a little bit, if it's an incomplete application, they have 45 days to resubmit all the needed documentation, or the application completely goes away. Okay. So then let's say it's complete. I then send it out to all the departments that review our applications. Again, it was those departments that I named just a few minutes ago. They all get a copy of it. We're doing pretty much everything electronically these days. And so they typically, depending on the severity or the complexity of the project, it's usually about a 2-week review time that I give them to look at things. If based on those comments and they give me their review comments back within that 2-week time frame, based on those comments, I then make the decision as to, depending on the need as to what comments that exist, I may call another DRC meeting, Development Review Committee meeting, and I may have the applicant involved. I've had to do that on a couple. I think we did that with the fire department on Sweetgrass when the preliminary plat was coming through. There were some questions on some things that the fire department needed, and I felt like it was better, instead of sending just back and forth comments, I felt like it was better pulling everybody together, the applicable departments together, and having just a conversation. So sometimes that happens. It's not always needed, but if it is, it adds a little bit of time frame or a little bit of time to our process. So now we've gotten to a complete application. Departments have reviewed it, and we've gotten comments back to an applicant, either their engineer or their design team of some sort, and they work through that. Now that's up to them, and that's on their side how soon they get those comments back to us. I do let them know that if they want to hit a certain P&Z date or a certain city council date, they've got to get them back to us by a certain date. So I kind of give them as much guidance as I can through that, but ultimately it's up to them when they get it back to me. I will tell you, sometimes there are applications that after that first review, they go away and they never come back because they've realized they don't want to put up with, they don't want to meet our standard. And Haslet has a high standard of certain things, and they don't want to meet that. And so that's okay. The thing I love about Haslet is that we do know our standard, and that's all we want. We don't want anything less than that. And we're very comfortable with that. And I think that's what a community should do. And so there are sometimes they get our first review comments back and they're like, well, I don't want to build that water line that we make them build. I don't want to build that road that they've got to build. Well, okay, go away. And we've set our standard, and that's what we want. We're on our legal side. Our legal team has reviewed that, our requirements, and they know what we're requiring, and they know that legally we can require that. So we're comfortable there. But let's say that the applicant resubmits and all their comments they've met all of our comments, okay? So then we have a 15-day public notice requirement. On any application, this is also a little bit unique to Haslet, which I also think is a good practice that cities ought to do. Any application that comes before you, I've done a 15-day public notice. That public notice requires an ad in the newspaper, which is a little bit dated because really who reads the newspaper anymore? But it's still required. We post a sign on the property. We send everyone within 200 feet, every property owner within 200 feet of the application, we send them a notice in the mail that has, this is what they're asking for. And then on the back of that, there's a map. And so, and it shows them exactly where the application is. And so they can clearly see it. It's got my telephone number, my email address. They can call and ask me any questions they want to ask. And so I believe Haslet goes well beyond, definitely, I know they go well beyond what the state requirement is. I will let you know. The state requirement is the only thing that you have to give public notice for in the state is a zoning change. We do it for plats, replat. I mean, everything you see, we do a public notice. And so I think that's a good thing. It keeps your public informed of what's going on. And I think that's a very, very good thing. So we have that 15-day notice requirement. So before, even after staff has reviewed everything, I still have to wait 15 days before I can really publish anything because of that public notice requirement. So here are the two time frames that you probably heard me repeat before again, is we've got a 30-day statutory requirement to act on applications. I will also tell you, every time the state legislature meets, they try to restrict that 30 days down further and further into a box that sometimes makes it impossible to react. We just finished 2021. So in 2019, they did it where now it's got to be acted on 30 days. Once I've said the application meets all of our ordinances as staff, I said it's complete on a track on this, then I have within the time set we've said it's an application is correct and it's correct to the time it gets on P&Z's agenda is 30 days. Then it's got another 30 days from the time it leaves your agenda to the time it gets on City Council's agenda. So I've got to keep that in mind, because if I miss that by one day, it's automatically approved, no questions asked. Yeah. Just a little bit, because I think it's important that y'all know. There was a bill that was introduced into the House legislature this past season. It did not pass, thank goodness. But it would have restricted cities from requiring any type of detailed studies on property to be subdivided. For instance, we require for I'll use Sweetgrass as an example, anytime a preliminary plat, they would have to do a preliminary drainage study, right? That makes sense. We want to see what the development's going to affect downstream and all that kind of stuff. Based on the bill that was introduced, we would not be allowed to require that. Now that bill did not pass, but that's the kind of and I'm going to be kind of blunt. Maybe this is partly because I know I'm leaving y'all soon and I can be a little bit blunter with you, but also that's the kind of attack that the state legislature puts on cities that want to protect the development in their communities. And I don't completely blame the state, because the state is only listening to the people that come and talk to them. And that's the developers, because they've got the money, right? So I just want to encourage y'all. I've had this conversation with Mayor and the staff. And I'm getting on a soapbox here and I apologize, but when the next legislative season comes open, make sure your staff is paying attention to that and ask them questions about what bills are being out there that may affect y'all. So y'all can reach out to your local officials and voice your concern and explain to them how, if you pass what I may deem as a ridiculous law, what it's going to do to your community and that kind of stuff. I'll get off my soapbox now. So anyway, so I've got those time frames to deal with. In the process of reviewing those 30 days, we're also reviewing civil plans for applications that have to go through that same time frame. So there's a lot going on in those 30 days. The last thing I want to go over are just the different application types, and we've kind of touched on this a little bit already. So we have, as planning and zoning and city council from a development standpoint, you have three real basic groups of applications that you see. You see zoning change applications. Those are discretionary. Those are, if you feel like, and I use that word feel like because it really is, if you feel like in your heart or your gut, it's just not the right development for the city. As a staff member, I can tell you there's always a way to find something that, whether it's going to add traffic. Everything's going to add traffic, right? But now the question is, on the other side of that, you can say, but are they going to improve the traffic to help future down the road? It could in some cases. It could. I mean, that's why we require those traffic studies to give you better information on that. You can ask for more information on that. When you're in a zoning change state, you can't tell the developer, if you do this, we'll give you the zoning. That's contract zoning. That's against the law. You can't do that. But you can say, before I make a decision, Mr. Developer, I want to see a more detailed drainage study. I want to see a more detailed traffic study. You can ask for that. It's that developer's decision as to whether they're going to say, you know what, that's too much money and I don't want to do that and we're not going to provide that. Well, then you've made if you really want to see that, then your recommendation is to deny because you feel like you need more information to make that decision. Okay?
Would the exception to that be a plan development where you can specify requirements?
You're right. No, you're exactly right. You can say in a plan development that like a recommendation of approval, especially this board, your job is you can say recommendation of approval, but we'd like to see a traffic impact analysis on the project. You can do that you can also do that a little bit with an SUP. SUP, specific use permit. That's another type of zoning change application that you see. I don't know if we've seen one since I've been here.
Yeah, we used to see them for gas wells all the time, but it's been a
Okay,
while
yeah,
since we've seen one.
yeah. A great example, because on gas wells, and I've reviewed some of those that have been done in the past, you placed additional landscaping restrictions on them that were above and beyond what the ordinance required. You can do that on SUPs. You can also do that on plan developments. And the only thing that you can't add conditions on is a straight zoning change. Okay. So that's one type of application. You've got zoning, which is discretionary. The SUP is discretionary. PDs are discretionary. Site plans are another type of application. And I know that's something that we've talked about a little bit. The site plan application, it's more of an administrative approval process. If it's gotten to this board or this body and staff or development review committee is recommending that it meets all the ordinances, unless something comes up in a public hearing or unless something, I'd say unusual happens, that it's determined that it's not meeting an ordinance or it's found to be deficient in some area, you pretty much have to, it's got to be approved. It's met all of our ordinances. You don't really have much of a chance to change anything. And that kind of goes along the same with plating. Plating's got a little bit more legal ramifications to it, and I don't really want to get into that, but kind of what we talked about with the time constraints. If you don't act on a plat in a certain amount of time, it's automatically approved. Site plans don't have that legal time constraint. But I'm going to tell you right now, if somebody's gotten to the stage of developing a detailed site plan that staff's reviewed and has gotten before you, they've invested the type of money into it that if you just deny it without any ordinance backing you up, you're probably, again, I'm not your legal representative, but you're probably opening yourself up for some type of liable situation. I know that the last site plan we had come up, there were questions about, if you recommend denial, are you personally held liable? Your city attorney gave you that answer. Whether you agree or disagree, that's your city attorney. And I think, now I'll say this again while I'm on my way out the door. I'll say this. I think Haslet has an excellent city attorney. And I think the advice that you were given that night was the right advice to be given. And nothing that our city attorney has said, I found any other city attorney in the state of Texas to tell me something otherwise. And so I don't think I would, my opinion, again, I'm out the door and y'all can say this guy's crazy and I can respect that too. My opinion is you've got a good city attorney that's giving you good legal advice based on my experience in this field is what I'll say to that. I know some of you have mentioned some concerns with that. I'm just putting it out there. That's my opinion. There was a question if commission members were liable.
As a reminder, that came up during executive session, so I'm not sure we should be discussing it.
Yes. Thank you. So anyway, yes. So back to the platting aspect of things. So that's going to be our third type of application. Plats, again, if they meet all the administrative requirements of the ordinance, again, we have no choice but to approve it. And if we don't act on it within that certain time frame, they are automatically approved.
So you've used the term act on it a couple of times, and I just want to make sure that we all understand exactly what you're saying. So acting could be recommending for approval, recommended for denial, or continuing, right? Tabling isn't acting on it in any way, right? Or is there was continuing, really not taking action on it as well.
So my experience is that if you, let's say if it's a plat and you continue it, just it depends on your reasoning for continuance, I guess is going to be my answer to that.
Okay.
Because if you continue it based on again, an ordinance specific concern, let's say more information is provided at a meeting that maybe staff wasn't aware of or something to that nature, and you say, we're tabling it to get an answer on this ordinance, it may be, I've seen in cases that it may be that you have to reschedule a meeting and act, either approve or deny within the, if you've got some time in that 30-day period, you've got to schedule, like let's say, for instance, your meeting's tonight, and I'm going to use the example of the case that you had tonight. If y'all decided that you were going to continue or table the action tonight on this plat that you approved, then you, if you, let's say the 30-day time frame was up next Tuesday, I would say, okay, we can continue it to next Tuesday, but if you don't act on it by next Tuesday, it's automatically approved. Platting is pretty specific in that 30-day time frame. Now, keep in mind, site plans do not follow that 30-day requirement.
And what about a zoning change with that?
There is no time frame on zoning changes at all. So you can table zoning changes until you're comfortable tabling.
Okay. There's really site plans where we have to take action inside that 30-day.
Plats.
Plats. I'm sorry, plat. Okay, thank you.
Really the last thing, and I can provide this detail for you. I just didn't really want to go into it, but I've had people have asked, well, what are you looking at on plats? All of this is in our ordinance. All of it's in our subdivision ordinance. It's just a checklist of things that we look at. But it's not something that staff makes up on their own. It's something that we look at and it's ordinance based. The same that and all this stuff is on our website. The same for any type of civil plans that we review. We look at that as well. And we have some internal checklists for zoning and SUP applications. Some of those are based out of the ordinance. Some of them are just good common practices. None of it is anything extreme that would make an applicant invest more than what they need to invest for that stage of the development project. But those are where we get those checklists, and those are what we look at. We really do focus on, if it's not in the ordinance, then we can't enforce it, but we can always ask for it type thing. So I know I went through that fairly quickly, but I just kind of wanted to give y'all an overview of what staff's doing, because y'all don't see that and y'all don't know what we're doing behind the scenes. And so, yeah, I can answer any questions you have or anything you'd like to comment on.
Are there any questions for the city staff?
Well, I appreciate you giving us the insights that you did there. And this, I guess, is probably like the first step that we would have in training, right? And it seems like we're all in agreement that the training is needed and it's going to be provided. But with your leaving now, is there a backup plan on where, is there somebody else that's going to do it or what?
Mr. Quinn and I have been talking about that. We don't have official, official guidance on where we're going with that yet. I do not know, and I know that Mr. Quinn's also aware that the training is something that's on the horizon, something that y'all want to see. So I know that will continue forward. That training was always going to involve a legal representation, and so, because as you can tell, a lot of this is legally based. So I always envision that being having a planning professional and a legal representative to give you both sides of it, tell you what each side's looking at and how they complement each other. I do not have an exact answer for you, Mr. Markson, but I will. I know that administration knows that this is a priority.
Mine was that I think the last time we had talked, we were targeting July for the training. And now it's, of course, disrupted with his leaving here. So just
Once you leave, will the staff, I guess, rearrange themselves to take over your position in the meantime? Because in the past, we did all the work until somebody like you came along and did the work for us.
I'm
No.
sorry. No, I'm just kidding. No, we will. I know that they will advertise, or at least I'm being told they will advertise for my position. I think the question right now that Mr. Quinn and I are having is what's going to happen in the interim. And we had some of those conversations today, and we'll continue to have those. And I will say that we are, and I alluded this to my email last week about the lighting ordinance. We are a little short-staffed across the board right now. Our permit tech is also out. We're seeing record number in our building permitting activity. So our building official, we were a department of 3, so we weren't flush with people to begin with. And so our building official is taxed right now. But so we're talking about interim plans and how to handle that. I trust that the staff you have now with Mr. Quinn's leadership will continue to be professional, and we'll make sure that you get what you need, and that staff will still do their job.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Are there any other questions for city staff regarding the application process and how those move forward? Mr. Morrison, thank you very much for taking the time to go through that with us this evening. Okay. All right, moving on. Agenda item 4 is executive session, which we don't need. 5, taking action on executive session, we do not need. Agenda item 6 is the status of current development projects. There's an exhibit in our packet that we received. Are there any questions regarding those exhibits? If there's no questions, we'll take a, yeah. They were, they'll be available at the next meeting for review. So we'll be reviewing 2 sets of minutes, current meeting and the past meeting, and those will be reviewed for approval. Okay. And anything significant on our future agenda items that we need to discuss today?
Not that needs to be discussed. I will tell you that there are quite a few items that are going to be scheduled for that July 27th meeting, I believe. Make sure I got that meeting right. I believe it's July 27th. Yes, July 27th is your next meeting. There are quite a few applications that will be presented at that meeting.
Thank you.
And you're leaving the 9th?
Yes, sir.
And will anything be showing up on the agenda regarding the lighting ordinance?
I don't know. What I'm planning to do this week is to sit down with Mr. Quinn and the city attorney, talk about how we progress during the interim. And so if I can get some of my research over, then maybe the city attorney can take over some of the lighting stuff. He would probably be the one that would do the bulk of that at this point in time. But I can't give you a definite answer on that, but I will make sure that my work gets passed on to Mr. Quinn and the city attorney.
I have another question for you about the lighting being left out. Is it possible that there may be something else that never got put in? And if so, will that just like pop up when that situation happens?
It's possible. I couldn't really, I mean, I've looked at that because that was something when Diana was still here. we both had that conversation because, as I said at the last meeting, when the zoning ordinance was changed in 2017, they did away with the overlays and they didn't think about that, which it's not. It is, but it's not. It's something that happens and it's unfortunate, but we caught it in time. That's a tough question for me to answer. And all I can say is that I think as you know, I think you've got a pretty solid zoning ordinance. The bulk of things that you typically tend to care about, minus the lighting ordinance, is in there. Building articulation, landscaping, buffer yards. You've got some pretty significant buffer yard requirements. So I think you've got some neighborhood protection things in there, which are kind of what I subject the lighting to protect neighborhoods and that culture of the city, I guess, is what you're looking for. So yeah, I think overall you're okay. Now, that to say that in 6 months you're reviewing something and just like the lighting ordinance comes up and you're like, well, wait a minute, it's possible. Anything's possible. But that's also to say that something new could come up and maybe your sign ordinance is out of date and it needs to be updated. Ordinances always need to be checked, always need to be looked at with the current trends and make sure you're updating them. And I am confident that, again, with Mr. Quinn's leadership, the planning director will do what they need to do to keep y'all in line with those trends.
So you said there's several applications coming forward.
Yes.
Are there any surprises that we ought to be aware of?
No. Most of them are plating that I'm thinking of right now, and there's 2 text amendments at least one text amendment, maybe a second text amendment that City Council has directed us to make to the zoning ordinance and the subdivision ordinance. Again, nothing that I think is surprising. So no, I don't think you're going to have anything surprising. I just think you are going to have a full agenda at the next meeting. And I've already, in the conversation I had with Mr. Alabon this afternoon, I've told him my plan, and Mr. Quinn knows this is my plan, to get all those public notices done, to get everything done before I leave, so that staff doesn't have to worry about that. You're just going to need somebody here to present and answer any questions that you have, which I'm confident that anybody on staff, even Mr. Chambers sitting behind me here, can answer those questions.
Right, yeah. I do not.
That was a ringing endorsement.
See, there you go.
All right.
I got one. The Highway 156 improvement. We were going to get text out in to talk to us. I think last time it came up, Travis had taken that. Are we anywhere with that?
No, I'm not anywhere with that. That you're right. I do remember Travis, and until you just said that, it had not gone anywhere else. So I will add that to my list to make sure that Mr. Quinn is aware of that request.
Hey, thank you. Agenda item 8, no changes to our meeting schedule for the balance of the year. And I believe I'm going to be traveling on business next month, so I most likely will not be here. So we'll need our vice chairman to lead our meeting in my absence. I will try to avoid that conflict, but I don't see that it's going to be possible at this time. And with that,
I make a motion, we adjourn.
we are adjourned. The time is
I was going to make a motion.
7:36 p.m. Thank you.